Shalom. So today we're going to look at Deuteronomy chapter 28 and verse 68. So we're going to look at few aspects which this is going to lead to. So we're going to talk about how they weaponize history as a means of control, right? Because once you can write history, once the conquerors get to write history, they can control the narrative. And the narrative is what will be sold unto everyone else, including the victims of those circumstances. The purpose for this is to make it seem as if the people were actually in agreement with what was being done to them. The next thing is what actually happened back then. Was it a slave trade or was it a race war? Like I said earlier, the conquerors get to write the history and they write it in their language. They write it in words that is censored to take away the actual evil intention, right? So when you say slave trade, when you think about trade today, you have like containers with goods or whatever is inside of them waiting on the port to be exported into another country. So when you say slave trade, was it a bunch of people say, hey, I'm a slave, trade me, sitting at the wharf, waiting willingly to go on these ships? What actually happened? So we're going to discuss what actually happened because people don't talk about what happened. They only justify what they did. So religion, again, can be used as a tool of conquest. They fought many wars in the name of religions. So with that being said, we're going to look at some differences with English language and CIA language, because when they use English language to us, we convey one message, but among themselves, they know exactly what they're talking about. So you have a lot of these spiritual enlightened people when they go out there and say they're teaching their own people the true history. But when you go and say, oh, the slave trade, guess what? These people, these CIA sitting in their offices and laughing at, hey, look at those folks, think they're woke, think they're enlightened. And they're pushing the same concept. Because when you tell people about slave trade, what concept do they get in mind? But what if you were to go out there and tell them about a racial war that took place? You see, it would change everything. It would change the way they perceive the message. So we need to stop teaching our own people that there was a slave trade. There was a race war, right? We will get into the details of that. We will get into the details of that and also other words that were used to censor these information, right? The last thing we're going to look at is how you make a slave during a race war. How you make a slave, because to annex a land is very easy. The hard part is how do you maintain peace after all what is done. We will look into those aspects as well, right? So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to go to the book of Romans chapter 15 and verse 4. It says, for whatsoever things were written aforetime were written for our learning, that we through patience and comfort of the scriptures might have hope. So what was documented before, it was written for us to understand, for us to learn, for us to become more aware, right? So when you understand the history is cyclical, right? So it's important to understand from your own language, because these other languages do not give you the same meaning. It takes away the effect. Matter of fact, let's get that in the book of Ecclesiasticus chapter 1 and verse 1. It says, "Wherefore, let me entreat you to read it with favor and attention, and to pardon us, wherein we may seem to come short of some words which we have labored to interpret. For the same things uttered in Hebrew and translated into another tongue have not the same force in them, and not only these things, but the law itself, and the prophets, and the rest of the books have no small difference. For when they are speaking in their own language, have no small difference when they are spoken in their own language." So once it's translated, guess what? The effect is taken away. Let me say that again in a different way. Once you change a person's language, no, it is in your power to rewrite their history. All of these, all of these things is part of how you make a slave and maintain peace after. No, everything that took place back then, no one talked about what was really going on, right? Because telling us that a slave trade took place didn't really give much details about what was going on. But rather, everyone was just justifying what they did. And the rationalization for everything that took place was in the name of religion. Religion was used for the justification of what they say they were converting non-Christians, that's political correctness, non-Christians to Christians, right? It sounds easy. You go to a culture that is not Christian and you say, hey, what do you think about this guy? His name is Jesus and he came to save the world and he loves everyone. And it sounds pretty much like that, right? How would they pass on this same message to the men who were going to carry out these acts? They didn't tell them that there were some non-Christian. They didn't tell them that there was some non-Christians culture out there and we're going to go and preach Jesus to them and convert them. They had to do what? Give them an image, paint a picture. These people are savages, they're barbarians, and we need to go and do this, we need to go and do that. So the only thing that they got in mind was to do what? Kill and destroy. That's how you convert a people. You send armed military to invade. First, you send them to spy because you have to spy out the land. You have to check out their defenses, the warriors, the weaponry, and so forth. And this is the reason why you enter with 3 ships. Because once you're sitting out there looking at the ocean and you see 3 ships coming, your first thought is going to be, hey, some merchants are coming, some traders are coming. They're coming to trade. But if you saw a fleet of 18, 50, whatever amount of ships, you know that you're going to be under siege. So first they send them as spies, right? Pretending to be doing this, doing that, doing that. Bring you gifts from their homeland because they're looking for settlement, trading partners. No, in their heart was something else. They were looking how to take your land. So after they don't spy it out, make friends, and they go back, guess what? They go back to their kings and they get funded. They don't use their own military. They fund mercenaries. So they had to do it off the books, outside the books. So they send mercenaries, right? So under the papal bull, they signed these agreements to go and colonize every non-Christian religion, every non-Christian culture. All of this was done to bring all these people under the submission, under the dominion of Rome's rulership. Now this process is called forced denationalization. It means you take away their indigenous rights. So you wonder why you are the native to a country, but you don't have any right to vote? That's what it's called. Just like they did with the people of Lili Okalani. So these armed mercenaries, what they do is they stage these military coups, get into your country, and force your kings to sign new legislations. And this was to take away your right to vote. They can even force your king or your queen out of power and set up their government in your land. And with you don't have any right, because these were democratic societies. People vote. People vote. Once they take away your right to vote, guess what happens? You're powerless. They denationalized you. And another process called dispossession, this is where they take away your birthright property. They take away your inheritance. And in order for this lie to appear to be true, this is creating an illusion, right? In order for this to appear true, what they had to do was to give you different names. Now, let's go to the book of Deuteronomy, chapter 28, to get some insight on this. Let's go to verse 37. It says, "And thou shalt become an astonishment, a proverb, and a byword among all nations whither the Lord shall lead thee." So what does it mean when he said astonishment, proverb, and a byword? What is a proverb? What is a byword? For example, what if you want to say Hollywood without saying Hollywood? You'd say glamour, right? So that's what a byword is. So when they say we came and saw Arawak, we saw Tainos, we saw Mayans, we saw Aztecs. Guess what? You look at yourself today and you know that you are not a Mayan, you're not an Aztec, you're not a Taino, you're not a you're not any of these types of people. So you could never be the rightful owner for the land that you're in. So you don't even have something to fight back for. Because you believe the rightful owners, they're all wiped out. Okay, then let's get some facts. Let's get some evidence on this, right? The people that they claim live in this land, what did they look like? They said they look like this, the image you're seeing on the screen right now, right? Okay, let's go to another analogy and then come back here to get some answers. When you deal with Egypt, the images that you see in their writings, right? What would you use to confirm that these images are true, are their actual facts? They would go in, do their archaeological digs, and whatever they find, it would match the images of what you're seeing, whatever relics or whatever they found. So they could confirm that these writings were true, right? So now let's use that same logic to confirm ours, that these people that they said Arawaks, Tainos, Mayans, Aztecs, let's go into the archaeological aspect to confirm that they are speaking the truth. So first, let's go to the book of Revelation, chapter 12 and verse 16. It says, matter of fact, let's start at 15. It says, "And the serpent cast out of his mouth water as flood after the woman." The woman is Israel, right? The lies come out of the serpent's mouth. What is the mouth of the dragon? The meat. How do they communicate with us? How did they feed us these lies? The media. All of these news stations, matter of fact, all of these propaganda stations, these school systems, these religious institutions, all of these are the mouth of the dragon. All of these people are their false prophets. Now, what we're going to use to swallow up these lies, because having the Bible alone is not enough to swallow up these lies, because you still have the Bible and you don't know. anything that's going on. So you need something to confirm that what happened actually happened, right? So verse 16 says, and the earth helped the woman, and the earth opened her mouth and swallowed up the flood. The flood is the lies. Swallowed up the flood which the dragon cast out of his mouth. So the flood, we're going to take one of the flood. People were here called Arawaks, Taínos, Indians, Aztecs, Mayans, and so forth. And they looked like this. Now, we're going to use the earth. Where is the archaeological evidence to confirm that this happened? These people were here 600, 500 years ago. Because if you can go back to Egypt, which is over thousands of years ago, and you can confirm that this history is true, then we're supposed to be able to go back to 500, 600 years ago and confirm the same thing with archaeological facts. There's no relic of these people. There's nothing that they left behind, no inscription, nothing. It's all a lie. It was all a story, a narrative. They sold these narratives to us, and we're selling it to our children and to our children's children, and then they are doing it to theirs. When are we going to break this cycle? We have to come back to our God given name, what we were called from the beginning, not what they call us. Because you're not gonna know what you're connected to. You're not gonna know what to fight for. Who are you gonna stand with if you don't know what ethnic group you belong to? These foods that you're eating now, your ancestors weren't eating them. These type of clothes that we're wearing, the way that we treated each other, the way that we're treating each other, that's not how we used to treat each other before. What type of love we used to display to one another, how we used to treat and care for our wives and children, how our women used to take care of us, the respect, the love, the honor. If you don't know where you're coming from, how are you going to know where you're going? It's like having no sense of direction. So now we're going to get into what we call what happened, right? Was it a slave trade or a race war? Now, when you think of race war, this has been from the beginning. Let's go to the book of Genesis, chapter 1, and verse 26. It says, and God said, let us make man in our image, after our likeness, and let them have dominion over the fish of the sea, and over the fowl of the air, and over the cattle, and over all the earth. So it's not all nations having dominion over animals. It's saying one man is going to have dominion over all the earth, including the other men, the other nations. So the first kingdom that was established was the kingdom of the Adamites. Now, you have ways and ways to go about certain things, because you can be a great king without killing people, without destroying their culture, without doing all these things, dismantling their families. There was a time where Tyre, Zidon, Byblos, those people, they had power, trading power. They conquered the earth, and it's not through military tactics, but with their economics and their trading power. They were on the coast of the Mediterranean. That was like the heart, the center of trading. So Adam and his people, they did not go and destroy everyone else. But they had wisdom on how to have dominion and maintain things in the earth. So race war has been from the beginning. It's a natural cycle. And like I said again with the language, when you think of prophecy, prophecy in Greek culture, from the standpoint of a Greek mind, guess what it means? It means that you say something today, it happens in the future, and you say this is the fulfillment of the prophecy. Prophecy from our Hebraic standpoint, it is a cycle, a pattern. It keeps happening over and over. So the pattern is that if you sin against the Most High, you're going to go into slavery. And it's a pattern. It's going to happen over and over. You're in your kingdom, you transgress the laws, you go into hard bondage. You get set up back in your kingdom, you do the same transgressions, you go, and it's a pattern. So you see how important our language is? Because we have ways that we talk. It doesn't carry the same effect. It doesn't carry the same meaning when translated to another language. So we are out here thinking that we can understand this document, this ancient Eastern document, from the standpoint of a Western language, a Western culture, and a Western mind. This is why they're laughing at us with the Bible, saying that, thinking we're keeping the laws. We have to step outside the perimeters of their language, of their cultural way of thinking. So when you go back to what actually happened, it was not a slave trade, it's a race war. And this is how they use words to change the effect, to change the force. When you think about a country, when you think about trade, you think about some containers sitting at the wharf waiting to be exported or go back and forth, right? So when you think about slave and trade, it's like putting the concept that there were some people sitting on the wharf say, hey, I'm a slave, trade me, and they voluntarily would do it. That's the picture they paint here by using their words, the subtlety of their words. But the experience of what actually happened was a whole different thing. So what we know today as a slave trade was actually a racial war. And even if you go back to the 1100s, you see where Arabs who were in conflict with their Islamic empires of Africa, back in the 1100s, right? These people would ally themselves with the Europeans, and guess what? Even the black Christian traitors. And we know this from long time history, because when you go back into the book of Maccabees, chapter 1 and verse 43, it tells you, yea, many also of the Israelites consented to his religion. We take unto their culture, we take unto their politics. And these were not the peasants, these were not the low people of society. These were the nobles, the priests. These were the ones that were in agreement. These were black Christian traitors. And what was the goal of all of this? So they could destroy every black civilization. And probably that's too many words. So I'm going to say it again, but I'm going to use one word. Let's jump down to verse 49. It says, to the end that they might forget the law and change all the ordinance. So guess what? Within your law, inside is embedded your civilization, how you lived, how your ethnic group of people, how they carry themselves, how they treat themselves, the way they eat. There's a dietary law that's included in it. There's a marriage law. There's a childbearing law that's included in it. There's a law of agriculture that's included in it. There's a law of all these things of how to live. That was our civilization. That's what they changed. That was the whole goal of what they were doing. And that cycle is always continuing. So you had black Christian traitors who would do this back then. It's the same until today. No, when you look at the English language and the CIA language, meaning the codes and how they censored words and so forth, right? When you think about this discovery, there's a whole doctrine about it, right? And with the meanings of their words. So in the school system, they would say, oh, Christopher Columbus discovered all these regions, right? What is your concept of discovery? Matter of fact, let's get into the dictionary because that's how the English language is. You have to go to a dictionary to get the idea of what the word is actually saying. So, discovery, the definition says something discovered, the discovering of new things, new, keyword new, right? Uncovering or an act of uncovering or revealing something, a revelation, right? That's discovery in English language. Now, in CIA language, based on actual experience, how would you define discovery? When you think of what Christopher Columbus and these Europeans under the papal bull, how would you define what they did? Discovery means that you go to a non-Christian nation, which in their term they call savages or barbarians. You conquer the warriors and the people that remain, which would be prisoners of wars. You claim them as your property and you call them slaves. And you establish your school systems. You take away their language, you establish school systems, and you teach them in that language so that their native tongue would be slowly fading away. So if we all understood that this is what discover means, then we can understand when they say Christopher Columbus discovered all these lands. And that is to show you that when they came over here, guess what it is telling us about the people that they came and saw? They were not Christians. Because they would need to give them their Christian culture. They would need to give them their European traditions if they were already Christians, celebrating all these European traditions. They would need to bring that because these people would have it already. So, what people did they really come here and see? What traditions were these people keeping here that they would be considered barbarians? Because if they were Christians, apparently Christopher Columbus would need to discover these lands and these people. How do you define slaves? Like, what makes a person a slave? For example, when you go to the book of Exodus, it says 70 Israelites went down into the land of Egypt. Yes, but over a process of time, they were called slaves. But first, they were Israelites. So the same people that they refer to as slaves now in slave trade, right? What were they called before? They were called slaves. How did they change from having an identity to the identity being stripped and they were called slaves? So it just means that you have to conquer a people, you strip them of everything, and then once the survivors become your property, then they are slaves. When you think about the concept of a new world, right, based on what your definition of new is and what your concept of world is, and when you put them together, what's the final concept that you have in your mind? Are you thinking that some earthquake happened here, then some lava came, and then boom, the earth came up from the sea, and there's a new land, there's a new world? No, new world means that if you go into this land, if you go into this culture, if you go into this nation, and you wipe out the people, right, and the remainders that left, the remainders that surrendered, if you teach them a new culture, you give them a new identity, guess what? This now has become a new world. You notice when the Israelites went into the land of Canaan, it was never called a new world or anything like that. The Canaanites remained Canaanites. We did not change their identity. We did not do all these things to them. because there was also a law on slavery. No, it's funny because these Christians that claim to be used in the Bible and they use it to do their conquest, then how was it not in their spirit to follow the laws of how to treat your slaves, how to treat your property? Because it was legal to have a slave. Anyone could have a slave. But do you follow your laws and keep it and how to treat a slave? That was the cruelest time for us under Christian persecution. We went through dreaded times too with the Muslims, but the Christianity was the worst of all. That was the curse of black people. Like I said at first, it was religion. It was used as it was used to go into different cultures. India, they did the same in India. They did the same in India with the Mughal dynasty. But guess what? They did not destroy them psycho-spiritually as they did to us. So at first, it was non-Christian nations, but afterwards, guess what? The badge of servitude changed to color. Now we're gonna get some more insight on race war and how you actually make a slave. Now, race war is a strategy to dismantle families, tribes, and nations, right? And we're gonna go to the book of Psalms 83, and we're gonna get some more details on this, right? Like I said, race war is a natural part of life. So we don't get agitated because we understand this cycle. We did the same to the Canaanites. We dismantled their families, we messed up their tribes, we took their lands, we did not take their identity. Right? So let's go to the book of Psalms 83 and we're going to start at verse 2. It says, "For lo, thine enemies make a tumult." To understand this, you have to understand who you are so you can understand who your enemies are. They make a tumult, right? So where does this tumult take place today? What is it about? So you can know who your enemies are. It says, "And they that hate thee," the enemies, they hate us, "have lifted up the head. They have taken crafty counsel against thy people and consulted against thy hidden ones." It's the same tactics that was done in Exodus, right? It says, let's go to the book of Exodus, chapter 1 and verse 10. It says, "Come on, let us deal wisely with them, lest they multiply, and it come to pass that when there falleth out any war, they join also unto our enemies and fight against us, and so get them up out of the land." So you see, you didn't want your enemies to dwell in the same land because that's how your enemies, your other enemies, will stage coups against you, and they'll have these people, which is going to be a rebel to your kingdom. So they'll make alliances with outside forces. Like I said earlier, the Arabs, they did the same thing with the white Europeans to get rid of their Islamic empires of Africa. It's the same thing they did with World War One. These Europeans knew that they couldn't take down the Ottoman Empire by themselves. So they had to make alliances with the people who already were against the empire that was living there. And it's the same thing with America today. America is an empire, whether we call it empire or not. And this is a problem again with English language, right? For example, people will say Ethiopia, Selassie. They'll refer to him as an emperor. But Ethiopia under his rule was not an empire. So you see, you can give people titles, but the action form of those words are not there. And this is a problem with the English language. When you think in Hebrew, the word has to have an action form to it. You cannot separate it. because the action is the definition of the word. So today we refer to we do not refer to America as an empire, but we can see that they have a lot of colonies. So whether we call them empire or not, they are still an empire. And it doesn't matter how much you want to call Selassie an emperor, he never had an empire. Not saying Ethiopia did not have empires, but I'm saying under Selassie, they were not an empire. So he can never be an emperor. Play on words. So this is the important thing why you didn't want to keep those people in the land, because they would be the first to ally with their enemy to overthrow you. This makes it easy for them to stage military coups. And that's the problem with tourism. They come into the Caribbean and tell us that tourism is our main source of revenue. How do you depend on people coming to your country and claim that to be your GDP, as they call it? It has to be what is produced in the land. Bauxite, we have bauxite here. We have other things here. Those things should be the main source of our revenue, because you know what? When they set up these places and say tourism, that's just an open door for them to plant their CIA sleepers. So these people will be in your land procreating, and for generations, when they get enough numbers, you know what happens? They are still loyal to their homeland. Just like the missionaries that went to Hawaii and didn't go back home. After multiplying, then changed from being missionaries to being military. And they did what? Were in agreement with the American military, and that's how they overthrew the Hawaiian government. So once your government is not in agreement with the American system, look out for a military coup. History is cyclical. So back to Psalms 83, verse 4, it says, "They have said, 'Come, and let us cut them off from being a nation, and that the name of Israel may be no more in remembrance.'" Like I said earlier, after the forced denationalization and the dispossession, guess what? They had to give us a new identity. So we're only going to go back to, oh, we were Arawaks, we were Tainos. We would never go back to say we were the Israelites. But what happened if this land called Jamaica, they did not call it Jamaica, but they called it, say, for example, the land of Benjamin? You know what would happen? You would remember that you came from that nation, Israel. What if the people over there, they call them the land of the Levites? You would remember who you are. But when you say, okay, it's Haiti, it has no connection to your past, to your history, to your ancestors. So the changing of these names, they were all strategies. Now, another part of this was to destroy languages, cultures, and lineages. Because you know what is embedded in that? When you talk about the language of a people, the culture of a people, your identity is embedded in your language and your culture. They are all one and the same. So again, if you want to change a person's history, if you want to change a person's identity, change their language, and that will do the work. So again, as I said, it doesn't matter what we're trying to do in English language. If we do not go back to our original way of thinking in our language, no matter what we're saying in this English language, it's just going to be in a web. It's like you're in a maze, cannot get out, trying to find words to explain what you're saying, and it does not work because it does not carry the same force. So you don't have to speak fluent Hebrew, but guess what? You need to be able to think in the mind of your ancestors. I don't speak Hebrew, but guess what I don't do as well? I don't think in English. Sometimes it causes confusion when I speak to people, because what I'm saying and the message that they're conveying seems like I'm talking madness, because they're thinking it in their way when that's not what I'm saying. So it's hard to even use English words. Otherwise, I'll have to explain what I mean by each word that I say to prevent them from thinking how they perceive what I'm saying. So this is why I like to use actions to explain what I'm actually talking about. So again, we're going to go back to the book of First Maccabees, chapter 1 and verse 49. It says, to the end that they might forget the law and change all the ordinances. So like I said, you change your language, you change your culture, you messed up their lineage. Guess what? Now you can rewrite their history. Now you can give them a new identity. How do you give a person a new identity with their old language? You cannot do that. So this is why we were stripped from our ancient tongue. This is why they told us in schools, oh, we were Africans. Okay, you have over 1,500 different dialects in Africa. In our school system, in our school systems, which African language we were taught? We were only taught European languages. It means that we were only allowed to think in the perimeters of what they understand. How are you going to use code words in their language? If your language was not so important, why would they stop you from speaking it? If language doesn't matter, right? Since some people say whatever is in this language is the same in that language. Okay, if it doesn't matter, why would you change a people's language? To what end? There are still people who have not come out of the bondage of the language that they're being taught in or that they grew up in. So they don't see anything wrong with it. It's like a fish in a water. You don't know that you're in the water unless you get out. That's when you know, oh, there's something different from just the water that I know. And a lot of these people today are your teachers. They're stuck in the English language. They're stuck in the cultural way of thinking in this Western world. They cannot perceive anything outside of it. So you have a slave teaching a slave. The liberation starts here. Now we're going to get some details of making a slave. Now the first thing you have to do is you have to invade. Like I said, before that you send your spies, like Christopher Columbus and his three ship doctrine, right? You send spies, spy out the land. Then you come back with your armed mercenaries. You invade and you destroy the native warriors. Once you destroy the native warriors, that's where you set up your seaports. Now, why would you set up seaports in the land of your enemies? That's how you coordinate your slaughters. Just like the Honolulu in Hawaii. After the missionaries and their coup against the Hawaiian government, guess what? Those seaports was where the American military would come in to coordinate their slaughters, to have the US Marine marching on the lands to overthrow the government. History is cyclical, and I'll keep saying that until you get it. Now, after you go in and you slaughter all these people, what do you do with the surviving population? Because now that the warriors are dead, right? What do you do with the surviving population? And it's amazing when you look at the mind of the women back then who knew and understood war and the women today, right? Back then, when the women saw that their warriors are dead, they would flee to the mountains or some far, far inwards inner parts of the land because they knew that they were what? Unprotected. Today, it's not the same mentality because these women, in their mind, 119 is their protection or 911. So if you come in the neighborhood, destroy all the men, guess what? They're okay because they have 911, 119 emergency numbers. So you see the difference in thinking? Our people today don't know war, and that's a big problem. So like I said, once the native warriors are dead, the surviving population, you would enslave them. They were called prisoners of war. It's the same people you call slaves. Why you call them slaves? Because you can now claim them as your property. So once you become my property, you are my slave. So let us go to the book of 2 Maccabees chapter 6 and verse 6. It says, neither was it lawful for a man to keep Sabbath days or ancient fasts or to profess himself at all to be a Jew. You couldn't call yourself that you're an Israelite anymore. Your identity would be stripped. You're now my property. You are what I call you. I don't care what your name is. You are what I say you are. So over a period of time, guess what? Those type of names would no longer be in remembrance. The names of your people and your descendants after you, they're going to be named after our people. So after you have these people as your property, the next thing you have to do is to do what? You have to prevent them from teaching one another. You have to prevent them from teaching their ancestral traditions. Just like in Hawaii, they were killing out the traditions because everything has become what? Americanized. It's the same thing with us. So how would you prevent people from teaching one another? You needed a foreign religion to do that, and Christianity was that foreign religion. So they used Christianity to teach a new tradition. So now all the traditions that you're keeping, they're after the customs of Europeans. Has nothing to do with your ancestors. And even your way of worshiping your God is after the ways of Europeans. So even when you look at our community today, the Hebrew community, the Christian community, you know what they share in common? Neither of them worship the Most High the way that they should worship. They don't do blood rituals. Where does it come from? Because even the Hebrews who say they believe in all the laws, you know what they don't believe in? The ancestor traditions. Leviticus 23. So you're keeping Passover, but it says you have to get an animal and you have to slaughter the animal and you have to do all of these. You have to perform all these rituals. And the blood is a way to communicate with our God. So why don't you do that anymore? Who says the laws of these sacrifices were not to be done anymore? This is part of making us a slave. They disconnect us from our God. You know what happens when you disconnect a tree from the earth? The earth is the source of life for the tree. It dies. You know what happens when you take a fish out of the water? The water is the source of life for the fish. You know what happens when you take away black people from their God, from our God? You know what happens when you take away us as black people from our God? Our God is the source of our life. It's the same thing. So how are you keeping your Passover? You're just going to the meat market and order a piece of lamb and say you're keeping your ancestors' tradition? No, you're keeping something else. Even if there are two people in your homes, guess what? Even if there are only two people in the home, you do the same thing and you share the rest of the meat with other neighbors. You don't go buy a piece of meat. That doesn't have anything to do with your ancestor traditions. He said in the law that he did not come to destroy the law. Okay, so why are we not performing the ordinances of the Passover and these other feasts the way that the instructions said they were to be performed? So Christianity was used to change all of these things, to keep us as a slave. Not Christianity as in just in the church system, but the Western way of thinking. So Christianity was used to say that, okay, we were savages, we were barbarians, and these people were servants of God. The Christian doctrine is actually saying that Jesus looked like our slave masters, and our enslavement was the will of God. Now, why? How did we get to this point that we actually believe this? That it was the will of God? Now, think in your conscious mind, right? If you say to your son, if you say to a child, okay, this is fire. Don't put your hand in the fire. If you don't put your hand in the fire, all will be well. But if you put your hand in the fire, it's going to burn and it's going to be painful. No, after you give those two stipulations to the child, and the child went ahead and put the finger in and got the burn and is in pain. Do you teach the child that that was the will of God, or do you teach the child that that was the consequence of a choice that he made willfully? See the difference? Slavery was the consequence of a choice we make, of a choice we made, had nothing to do with the will of God. It's the will of our own conscious decisions. Now, like I said, to annex a land, that's the easy part, but it's to maintain peace with the people afterwards. You know what you have to do? You have to annihilate the total history, the entire past. And in order for you to do so, you have to destroy their language. When you think of Assyria, we know Assyria was a great empire back then. Okay, the Assyrian people, they are still here today. But you know what's not there? They don't have that land anymore. They're just like the tribe of Dan. They're still here, but they do not have a land where you can say, okay, that's the land of Assyria. Every time you're being conquered, your conqueror takes that part of your land. When you look at Russia today, Russia is the only country that is still growing. Every year it grows. Because every time you make war, you claim that part of the land. Russia keeps expanding, keeps getting bigger and bigger. So if you want to maintain the peace, censor the history. Make it seem as if the people were actually in agreement with what was done to them. And you ban their native language. So you set up school systems and teach your language, teach them even their history in your language. It won't do anything, no matter how much they know it. Ensure that their native tongue was never taught in schools. Because once a person starts to realize what their native tongue, what their original tongue was, you know what? They're going to remember their identity. They're going to remember who they are. This is why you'll never find them teaching Hebrew in our schools. And they create illusions of choices. Oh, you have options. You can choose between Spanish, French, Portuguese. Yeah, well, but all of these are European languages. None of these language will allow me to think outside of these European languages. All my history is going to be centered around these people and their way of life. So I hope this gives an understanding of what was done to us psycho-spiritually and what we need to do and how we need to understand when we speak and see the importance of languages and what it means to us, and also what change of language done to us. Shalom.